Congress and the President have to agree on funding for the U.S. government for all of its offices to stay open. They haven't. Their latest deadline to do this was Friday night. And though the House of Representatives passed a measure last week to keep the government funded temporarily, that measure failed in the Senate, and Democrats and Republicans spent the weekend blaming each other for the roadblock. Republicans control both chambers of Congress and the White House, so Democrats believe voters will blame Republicans for the shutdown. But the Republican majority in the Senate is slim. They hold 51 seats to the Democrats' 49. And Republicans believe Democrats will be blamed because they filibustered. They moved against legislation that would have kept the government open, and there weren't enough votes in the Senate to overcome the filibuster. So why did Democrats filibuster? Before they approved the budget, they want an agreement to be reached on what happens to 700,000 people who came or were brought to the U.S. illegally as children. Republicans don't want to negotiate on that until enough Democrats vote to reopen the government first. So yesterday afternoon, both sides were dug in. Most Americans are not directly affected by a government shutdown, but those who are face some uncertainty. Activists and protesters, Hollywood stars, and politicians turned out in cities worldwide over the weekend for what's called the Women's March. The first one, also a massive event, was held a year ago on the weekend when U.S. President Donald Trump was inaugurated. And many of this year's demonstrators, like those in the first Women's March, protested against the election and the policies of the U.S. leader. President Trump tweeted that people should march to celebrate America's economic success over the past year and the lowest female unemployment in 18 years. Other issues of the march included sexual harassment. Recently, there's been a wave of accusations against politicians, entertainers, and members of the media. Religious freedom, immigration, women's rights, and equality were also addressed by hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children who marched in America. And that's even if they have blind spot monitoring or emergency braking systems. But manufacturers are moving toward making cars with more autonomy. And one big argument for that is safety. The U.S. government estimates that 94% of deadly car crashes are because of human error, and that driverless cars could significantly reduce that. But what if they're hacked?
We all carry computers in our pockets, and everyday machines like thermostats, refrigerators, cameras, and even our cars are connected online. Experts call this constant connection the Internet of Things. And just like everything else, it's susceptible to security breaches. The two big questions that I have: could autonomous vehicles be hacked to hurt us? And how can we be sure that the personal data that we produce in these cars are protected? The answers are still not perfectly clear.
The Internet of Things is going to have enormous benefits that I think we can't even begin to realize. The power of computerizing and networking our environment. But there are risks also. Here we are creating an internet that senses, thinks, and acts. What we know about computers and software is that they have bugs, they have vulnerabilities. All computer systems can be hacked. So you can easily imagine these attacks being used against cars to cause the car computer systems to crash, or cars being used as the attack vector. So as we build autonomous systems that affect the world in a direct physical manner, we risk bad actors doing it. We risk glitches and errors causing physical harm.
Using cars as weapons is unfortunately already a tactic used around the world. The good news is that perhaps far into the future, properly functioning autonomous cars won't allow humans to hit people. It could neutralize this tactic of terrorism. But if the cars can be controlled remotely or hacked and programmed to cause harm, it could bring on a whole new set of issues. To see what's being done to make these systems more secure, I visited a company that actually started out in the video game industry. NVIDIA now also makes the graphic processing chips that go into driverless cars.
We've developed an artificial intelligent brain for the car.
And how they build those chips will have major impacts on the safety of future driverless cars.
What we're building is a computer first, and then the car is built around it. We're essentially building a map of the world in real time based on what we sense. We had cameras, ultrasonic sensors, radars, LiDAR, which is a laser scanner, and each of those sensors are generating a massive amount of data.
Data collection is crucial for allowing these cars to function. But like security, it also raises questions about how the information gathered from our personal lives will be used. The new technology has the attention of privacy advocates like Lauren Smith at the Future of Privacy Forum in Washington, D.C., a group that explores issues with all sorts of home gadgets, like Amazon Echo's Alexa system, drones, even smart dolls.
Alexa, are you spying on me?
I only send audio back to Amazon when I hear you say the wake word.
And now, autonomous cars.
It's important that people start to think about their cars in the same way that they think about their computer or smartphone. So if you use a technology like this that relies on connectivity, that relies on data inputs and outputs, you are creating sort of an information trail.
Data has good and bad uses. There's some very powerful reasons to collect data about us and our society and put it together so we can do research, we can better deliver services. Smart government is the wave of the future. But the same data can be used for surveillance, for control. I don't really think any government is prepared for the Internet of Things and what it's going to do. These are computers that affect the world in a direct physical manner. And there are risks to life and property. Largely, Western governments have taken a very hands-off view to regulation of the Internet, the United States especially. And that worked great when it didn't matter, when it was data, when it was a spreadsheet, when it was conversation. But when it's a car, when it's a medical device, when it's an appliance, when it can actually do physical harm, that changes everything.
Great to have you watching this Tuesday. Jumping right in, as always, for the first time since World War II ended in 1945, the Japanese capital of Tokyo held a drill that simulated a missile attack. Part of the drill, as you see here, was staged in an amusement park. It took about 10 minutes from start to finish. Instructions came out through text messages and a loudspeaker, and people who volunteered to participate moved quickly and calmly to some designated safe areas. Most of those were underground. Dozens of drills like this have been held across Japan in recent months. Like the U.S., Japan is a rival of North Korea, and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe says that the missile threat from North Korea has made the security situation in Japan the toughest since World War II. Japan's been making large purchases of military equipment recently, mostly from the U.S., and critics are concerned that Japanese leaders might be working toward expanding the military beyond its role of self-defense, and they accuse the Japanese government of politicizing the threat from North Korea. Japanese government officials say the 2 intercontinental ballistic missiles that North Korea fired over Japan last year are reasons why emergency drills are needed.
Nuclear weapons are terrifying devices, but much less of a threat until they're carried a distance by a ballistic missile. These ballistic missiles normally follow a curve. They're fired into the air and follow a predetermined trajectory until they hit a target. This requires intense preparation and testing. So who has those, and how can we defend against them? 31 countries are known to have ballistic missiles. 26 have missiles that can travel at least 300 kilometers, and 12 are known to be able to reach 1,000 kilometers. 8 countries' missiles fall into the last category, reaching at least 5,500 kilometers. These include ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, that can fly halfway around the world. And these are just the missiles that we know about. There is an underground trade in some of this technology, traded illegally on the black market. That's thought to have happened after the breakup of the Soviet Union. Iran has also been accused of providing missile technology to Houthi rebels in Yemen. So what can nations do to defend against them? The more they spread, the greater the focus on missile defense systems. 18 countries already have invested in some form of these vastly expensive systems, and 5 more are in the process of developing or purchasing them. But they don't solve the problem, as it's unclear how effective they are. For instance, two countries that the US sees as threats, North Korea and Iran, have far more missiles than the US or any other country has interceptors. So really, the US or its allies need a strategy to deal with hostile missiles before they're even launched.
With the 2018 Winter Olympics and Paralympics just weeks away, the Court of Arbitration for Sport is about to get very busy. That's a court of appeals, and dozens of Russian athletes who were banned from competing in the Games are hoping the Court of Arbitration can clear their names and allow them to take part in the Olympics. After an investigation into alleged doping, illegally taking drugs to perform better, the International Olympic Committee banned 43 Russian athletes for life. 42 of them are appealing. Many of them say they're part of, quote, collective punishment against Russia, a nation that's historically been an Olympic powerhouse. The country has repeatedly denied that it had a doping program for its athletes, but investigators say Russia had a system that allowed hundreds of athletes to cheat. The entire Russian Olympic Committee has been suspended from the 2018 Winter Games, so any banned athletes who are cleared will not be allowed to compete under the Russian flag or the Russian national anthem. After almost 3 days of being partially shut down, the U.S. government was expected to reopen last night. Legislation to temporarily fund the government and keep it from shutting down had been held up in the Senate, where Democrats used a filibuster to block it. They mainly wanted an immigration agreement to be reached before they moved forward with government funding. Republicans, who control the Senate with a slim majority, wanted the government to reopen before negotiations on immigration continued. Yesterday, the two sides reached what was called an arrangement. Republican leaders promised that the Senate would consider an immigration bill in February, and most Democrats then voted to end the filibuster, leading to the reopening of the government. The tally was 81 in favor of moving forward to 18 against. The shutdown was set to end after the Senate, the House of Representatives, and the White House all signed off on the funding legislation. Is this how we'll get groceries one day? You use your smartphone to get into a store. Hundreds of cameras track where you go and what you pick out. You load stuff into your bag and you walk out. No cashier, no checkout, no cash. After you leave, your credit card is automatically charged for what you took. This is the idea behind Amazon Go, a convenience store in Seattle, Washington that just opened to the public yesterday. According to the BBC, it has had some problems in the test phase, keeping track of shoppers with the same body types or groceries that were moved to the wrong shelves. But if it catches on, it could significantly change the shopping experience. It could also reduce the number of cashier jobs available. But it's one example of how technology is filling a bigger role in retail.
At first glance, this looks like any other Madison Avenue menswear store. But take a closer look. The first thing you notice, well, there's only one of every item on display. And there's only one size as well. And what about where you pay? Where are all the cash registers?
Think of it almost like the physical manifestation of a website.
Andy Dunn started Bonobos online 10 years ago. 5 years later, he began opening physical stores. Or are they? This is essentially not a store, is it? This is just a showroom.
I don't know what it is. We call it a guide shop.
They now have 48 of these so-called guide shops in the US, offering a one-on-one fitting experience, and then you just place an order online.
So we have here, probably no more than a 1,200, 1,400 square foot space where we're able to put in thousands and thousands of styles.
It's a concept so successful that last year Walmart bought the company for $310 million. Was it wild to think that you're now part of the world's biggest retailer?
It's wild. We thought offline retail didn't matter when we started the company. We thought the future was all digital. It's really both.
That future could mean rethinking not just store size and inventory, but also the people who work there.
What we're inside of is an unattended, fully automated store.
Deep Magic uses artificial intelligence, which recognizes all the stock on the shelves and tracks your every move.
So we are using camera technology. Like you remove something from the shelf, then we basically assume you're buying it. And if you walk out the door with it, we basically bill your credit card.
They hope to launch in stores this year amid formidable competition. Amazon's been testing its own cashier-free grocery concept, Amazon Go, for the past year. Should everyone in retail be afraid of Amazon, do you think?
I mean, I belong to Walmart, so I'm not afraid of it, but I think that the combination of having both great physical experiences with being digitally innovative, I think the combination is the most powerful thing.
And just like with a perfect pair of stretch-washed chinos,
That actually is going to get us the right ratio.
it's all about getting the right balance.
U.S. President Donald Trump's first major trade action of the year is to impose a tariff or a tax on solar panels and washing machines that come from other countries. Why these two items? America's independent International Trade Commission found that these imports in particular had hurt American companies. They've been sold at cheaper prices than American-made products, making it hard for U.S. companies to compete. So the Trump administration is placing a temporary tariff of 30% on imported solar panels and a tariff of 20% on large home washing machines. This will raise the cost of these imports to Americans and encourage them to buy panels and machines that are made in the U.S. instead. The taxes will be in place for 3 years and then be reduced after that. As a presidential candidate, Donald Trump had promised to reduce America's trade deficits. And a U.S. trade representative says the tariffs make it clear that the Trump administration will defend American businesses. Reactions to the decision were mixed. Whirlpool, an American company that makes washing machines and other appliances, says it plans to hire hundreds more people and create new manufacturing jobs. But Samsung, a company based in South Korea, says the tariffs will cause people to have to pay more for washing machines. And China, where most of America's imported solar panels come from, said it was strongly opposed to the tariffs and that they could cause trouble for the global trade environment. Critics say they could also hurt some solar industry jobs in America. President Trump isn't the first U.S. leader to do this. Former President Barack Obama also put tariffs on some Chinese solar imports, but they're still reportedly cheaper than American ones. The Trump administration says more trade actions like this are ahead. Just after midnight on Tuesday, the Earth jolted beneath the Gulf of Alaska. This is a Pacific body of water surrounded by southern Alaska. The earthquake that hit there was powerful, magnitude 7.9. The U.S. Geological Survey says only about 3 quakes that strong hit the Earth in an average year. And it was felt about 175 miles away in the southern Alaskan city of Kodiak. Residents described the tremor as a long, slow roll. And those sirens sounded and classes were canceled so schools could serve as emergency shelters, no major damage was reported. Still, people in Kodiak evacuated their homes and headed for high ground. The reason? A tsunami warning. Earthquakes at sea don't just bring the threat of shaking. This one brought fears of dangerous tsunami waves from the Gulf of Alaska to Hawaii and the west coasts of the U.S. and Canada. Some people in California were warned to avoid the coastline for 12 hours. Thankfully, the only tsunami waves actually seen were in Alaska, and they were small, less than a foot high. Meteorologists say the type of quake that occurred yesterday was the result of a strike-slip fault, when 2 plates move horizontally against each other. It's not believed to be as dangerous as a thrust fault when a plate jolts vertically. That can produce major tsunami waves.
Tsunami waves, or seismic sea waves, are a series of waves, not just one, that are created when there is an underwater disturbance, like an earthquake or a volcanic eruption. When an earthquake strikes, the erratic movement of the ocean floor can generate a tsunami. The first wave in the series can occur within minutes of the earthquake or hours. Areas that are closest to the epicenter will experience the waves much sooner than areas far away. One warning sign of a tsunami is water right along the coast rapidly receding. If you see this or find yourself in a tsunami-warned area, seek higher ground immediately and get as far away from the coast as you can. Make sure you stay in that safe place until the tsunami threat has ended.
Rainforests are the next topic today on CNN 10. They're found in places with a lot of rainfall, heat, and humidity. They cover about 6% of the land surface on Earth, but some estimates suggest they used to cover twice that, but have been dramatically reduced by deforestation, cutting them down for human use like wood, farmland, or mining. On the other hand, you could describe what's taking place in part of southwest India as reforestation. Based around the idea of improving the state of the world, The World Economic Forum is holding its annual meeting right now in Davos, Switzerland. Leaders of governments, companies, and societies from around the world are gathered at the mountain resort. And the forum's 48th yearly meeting is dedicated to creating what it calls a shared narrative to improve the state of the world. That may be easier said than done. One reason, an issue that's become increasingly important to many members of the World Economic Forum is globalization, the idea of governments and businesses working more closely with each other and becoming more integrated. Globalization is controversial. Its supporters say it's created jobs and industries in poorer countries, led to lower prices for goods, and helped nations work together towards solving the world's problems. Its opponents say it's led to bad working conditions in poorer countries, given certain companies too much influence in the world, and eroded the individual cultures of nations. U.S. President Donald Trump, who's at the forum, has spoken out against globalization in the past. He's also said his administration's America First policy would prioritize Americans when it comes to issues like international trade or foreign affairs. Because that contrasts with the vision of leaders like French President Emmanuel Macron, who's spoken in favor of globalization and governments working more closely together, President Trump's speech and the reactions to it will be closely watched when he gives it on Friday. Hugely successful for decades anyway. Last September, Toys R Us said it was filing for bankruptcy protection, meaning it was billions of dollars in debt and needed to reorganize its business to stay open. At that time, the Wall Street Journal reported the company would need to close some stores as part of the process, and yesterday, Toys R Us announced those closures. 182 locations in more than 40 states and Puerto Rico are on the list. This includes dozens of Babies R Us stores, which the company owns, and in all, the closures account for about 1/5 of all the Toys R Us retail locations in America. The 700 plus stores that the company has outside the U.S. won't be closed. Why is this happening? Two big reasons. One is named Amazon, one is named Walmart. Both are giving Toys R Us serious competition. But the company's CEO says these closures give it the best chance of coming out of bankruptcy as a stronger company. We're wrapping up our series on autonomous or driverless cars. Manufacturers around the world are investing in the technology to develop them. Businesses and consumers are anticipating ways they can use them. But one important thing to point out is that right now, on a scale of driving autonomy, we are at zero. Human drivers are completely in charge, or supposed to be, of all a car's systems. Some vehicles, like Tesla's Model S, do offer an autopilot mode, which the company calls a driver assistance system. But the technology is still being developed, and it's not meant to be completely relied upon by drivers. A car on autopilot was involved earlier this week in a highway crash with a fire truck. There weren't any injuries. Besides questions about their safety, though, we've talked about the potential of driverless cars to be hacked. We've covered concerns about tracking and privacy. We've explored their possible impact on the U.S. economy. And today, we're giving you a glimpse of what could be the future of autonomous vehicles, their use specifically in American cities, supposing everything goes as hoped by the manufacturers and supporters of driverless technology. Here's Chris Moody.
Americans love their cars. Getting my first car was one of the happiest days of my life. And I've loved driving ever since, especially fast cars. Yeah, that's not actually my car, but hey, look, this is my story and I can dream if I want to. But what if I'm part of the last generation to get excited about driving a car? I've spent the past year traveling the country talking to entrepreneurs, engineers, and test drivers who are building the cars of tomorrow. And when they imagine the future, driving a car isn't part of it. They envision roads full of cars driven by machines, where traffic jams are no more, where the death rate by car accidents drops to 0. The end of car ownership as we know it. Even to the point of human driving one day becoming illegal. I asked them all the same thing. What will the future look like? And what will it take to get there? What I found was really exciting, but also a bit shocking.
Okay, so as soon as I turn out of this parking lot, I'm gonna engage in self-driving mode. Right. So technically, we don't need a driver in the car.
So you and I are basically, in a way, just passengers now.
Yes.
We're test driving a car powered by autonomous vehicle startup Drive AI on the streets of Northern California. It's one of several companies working to utterly transform how we live. This test car could be the prototype of an automobile that not only takes you out of the driver's seat, but creates a future where you might not need to own a car at all. At least, that's what the people building him think.
Ownership will probably be abandoned. We mostly have cars that we summon on our phone. The car will come empty to us and pick us up, and we get inside in front of our office or our house, and it drives us straight to the restaurant, and there's no time wasted with parking.
In a world with self-driving cars, the utopia of the future, the only vehicles operating in the city are driverless electric emissionless vehicles. That they can position themselves in a state where you or I, hailing one from our smartphone, has one there within a minute.
We will look back and say, wow, people own cars to get from this point to that point?
Eliminating car ownership would drastically change the way we shape our cities.
The thing I'm most excited about is the ability on the street to reallocate space away from the storage of vehicles. Right now, cars sit idle 94.8% of the time. I mean, that's staggering. And I think we could literally close 30–40% of our streets to automobiles. You don't need cars on neighborhood streets anymore. You just need them on the perimeter of your neighborhood.
All of those parking facilities today get turned into residential space or parks or offices or restaurants, and we can kind of give back the city to the people that live in it and take it away from the automobiles, right? And I think that the quality of life and the opportunity to kind of reuse that space is going to be pretty magical.
Imagine it, never driving again. The nation of muscle cars, NASCAR, and open road. You're going to tell Americans they can't drive? Well, eventually, maybe.
There may be a law in place that basically says 50 years from now, humans cannot drive on public roads. And if a human does want to drive, you actually go to a private car ranch where you can basically drive to your heart's content.
All right, I know what you're thinking. A car ranch? But it's actually not that crazy. Remember, when we transitioned from horses to automobiles, we didn't shoot all the horses. Well, guess what? These car ranches actually already exist. Think of car companies that build high-end sports cars that are meant to be driven by humans, not robots. They're already building driving courses around the country. And yes, they're as fun as they sound.
We opened in May 2015. You'll come in, you'll meet you'll register and meet your driving coach, and then the driving coach will then take you onto the track. We believe this destination that we've created has got a long-term future.
Porsche knows that driverless technology is around the corner, but they still want people to love driving, even if they do less of it on public roads.
It's like being a kid in a candy store.
Yeah, seriously. All right, let's get back to the real world. The rise of car-sharing services has already made people accustomed to the idea of not owning a car. Today, human drivers pick us up when we use Uber or Lyft. But that's not gonna last.
Autonomous ride sharing is absolutely coming. It is right around the corner, and you'll see it in pockets at first, and slowly and surely you'll start to see these vehicles all over the place. There is an opportunity on a long enough timeline where we may have a fleet that is fully autonomous. As you start to see people adopt to transportation as a service, the hope here is that car ownership will slowly decline.
The ripple effect of automation on our cities will be felt beyond just cars. Drones will roam the skies making deliveries. And robots, like this one already in Washington, D.C., may bring food orders to your door very soon. In the nation's capital, Starship Technologies delivers food by an automated robot.
There it is. Hello, robot. I'd like a sandwich. Man. All right. So I just had a robot deliver me a sandwich on the streets of Washington, D.C. It's just in the trial phase right now, but in the future it could be a lot more common. Robots, drones, deliver your hoagie right to your house. All you gotta do is push a button on an app and you got yourself a sandwich.
All of these changes won't come easy. Perhaps the biggest fear? What will happen when all these robots get better at our jobs than we are? Will they replace us?
To be clear though, most experts say it'll be decades before completely driverless cars would fill America's roads. So for the near future, humans will still be more than autonomously in control. I'm Carl Azus. That wraps up this week's coverage on CNN 10. We're looking forward to seeing you on Monday.